Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Safwan Almas from Pamulang University. In this occasion, I'm going to explain about ethnography and ethnomethodology for final exam. Ethnography. Ethnography comes from two words, namely ethnos, which means people, and graphia, which means writing or drawing. Ethnography is a writing that describes a society, group, or human life. Ethnography is one method that is often used in the social sciences, especially in anthropology and some branches of sociology. Ethnography is also known as a part of historical science which studies people, ethnic groups, and other ethnic formation, ethnogenesis, composition, migration, characteristics of social welfare, as well as their material and spiritual culture. Ethnography is often applied to collect empirical data about human society and culture. Data collection is usually done through participant observation, interviews, and questionnaires. This science aims to explain the state of the studied society through writing. In biology, this type of study is called a field study or case report, both of which are used as common synonym for ethnography. Ethnography literally means writing or a report about an ethnic group, which is written by an anthropologist on the results of field work for several months or years. Anthropological research produces a very distinctive report, so the term ethnography is used to refer to research methods to produce a research report. Ethnography as a research report and as a research method is considered the basis and origin of anthropology. The characteristics of the ethnographic field research method are holistic integrative, thick description, and qualitative analysis in order to get a native's point of view. The main data collection techniques are observation participation, open and in-depth interviews conducted over a relatively long period of time. Ethnographic research prioritizes the sensitivity of researchers, in-depth thinking process, and interpretation of facts based on the concept used, developing these concepts with deep understanding and prioritizing the value studied. Research with ethnographic methods focuses on the view of the subjects as the object of research. Ethnographic research usually examines culture in society, which is the constructions of researchers from various information obtained in the field. In the context of community culture, what is depicted is the social behavior of the community, which is seen as it is. Forms of ethnographic research. John Creswell, an American academic known for his work in mixed method research, says there are two most popular forms of ethnographic research. There are realist ethnography. Realist ethnography is a researcher's attempt to describe culture situation objectively. Reports are written in accordance with what is observed and heard from informant without being influenced by personal bias, subjective judgments, or political goals of the researcher. In writing the report, the researcher uses a third-person omniscient point of view that presents social facts. Usually, some of the aspects of culture that are described in realist ethnography are family life, profession, communication patterns, networks, status, and social rules. And two, critical ethnography. Critical ethnography is a form of ethnography that aims to empower marginalized groups in society. In this form, the researcher is not neutral and participates in positioning himself in writing research reports. Researchers are also biased by defending marginalized groups. The goal is to be able to encourage change so that no more marginalized groups. Generally, the topics raised in critical ethnography include issues of power, empowerment, inequality, injustice, domination, repression, hegemony, and victims of crime. There are two methods ethnographic research data collection. First, method of observation. Observation is the act of observing the process carried out by researchers using their sense. The objects used as observation are the activities, interactions, and conversations of the observed subjects. There are four kinds of observation methods, namely ordinary observations, observations made by researchers without being directly involved with the research subject, controlled observation, the same as ordinary observations, but the researcher has selected prospective informant before making observation, and observation is involved. Researchers are directly involved with the community to be studied. And then full observation, condition when the researcher has become part of the community being studied. And the second method is interview method. Interview is a question and answer process between the researcher and the research person. Interviews were conducted to be obtained more detailed and in-depth information. In ethnographic research, interviews serve to get an overview of an issue from the interviewer's point of view that researchers can understand the perspectives, experiences, and lives of the informant. The data obtained from observations and interviews were then analyzed through the qualitative data processing with the following steps. First, data reduction, namely the steps of summarizing and selecting data based on the focus of certain categories or issues that have been determined for and formulated previously. And second, presentation of data, which after the data reduction, then the data is processed again by compiling or presenting it into matrices according to the state of the data. For example, data is entered into a chronological matrix which show the time sequence of an event, or data is entered into matrix that describes the relationship between factor or component in an event. And then we go into ethnomethodology. Ethnomethodology comes from the Greek that ethnos, which means humans or people, method, which means way, and logos, which means science. Ethnomethodology is the study or science of the methods used by ordinary people to create a feeling of order or balance in the situation in which they interact. In other words, ethnomethodology is the study of the ways used by a number of people in solving problems in their daily lives. Ethnomethodology is basically a collection of knowledge based on common sense and a series of procedures and considerations by which people can understand, seek, and act on the situation in which they find themselves. The theory of ethnomethodology was discovered by an American sociologist named Harold Garfinkel in the late 1940s. This theory was only recognized as a systematic theory after the publication of his work entitled Studies in Ethnomethodology in 1967. Garfinkel has a view of social facts as a fundamental sociological phenomenon. Social facts are external and tend to compel the individual. This view is identical with actors who are forced or determined by social structures and institutions. There is very little possibility of the ability to have freedom of judgment. Ethnomethodology has two concepts and types. First, institutional settings. Conventional sociological studies of institutional settings focus on their structures, formal rules, and official procedures for explaining what people do in them. They use institutions to complete tasks and create institutions themselves. People use procedures that are useful not only for everyday life, but also for generating institutions. The first ethnomethodological study was conducted in home-like setting. Then, the study of ethnomethodology developed to study everyday practice in a wider institutional setting, such as in courts, medical clinic, and police station. The purpose of this kind of study is to understand how people in these settings carry out their official duties in the process of forming institution. Conventional sociological studies in such institutional settings focus on their formal structures, rules, and procedures for explaining what people do in them. And the second, conversation analysis. Speech analysis is an attempt to understand in detail the fundamental structure of interaction through conversation. Conversation is an interaction activity that shows a stable and regular activity, which is an activity that can be analyzed. Conversational analysis focuses more on the relationship between utterance in conversation rather than on the relationship between speaker and listener. The target of the conversation's attention is limited to what is being said in the conversation itself and not the external focuses that limit the conversation. So that's all my explain about ethnomethodology and ethnography. Thanks for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.